It is my pleasure tonight to welcome all of you to this Q&A between Kahlil Robert Irving and Hamza Walker. It marks actually the official opening of Kahlil's captivating and thought-provoking exhibition entitled Kahlil Robert Irving, Archaeology of the Present. We are, of course, especially pleased to present his work as he's an alum of the Sam Fox School who graduated in 2017. My warm welcome to both Hamza and Kahlil. Welcome. The exhibition engages our contemporary moment marked by an ever-increasing state of hybridity in pointed ways. It mediates, or maybe better, shakes up our already fragile and unstable perceptions of past and present, truth and fiction, self and world, digital and analog, reality and imagination. Frequently taking the built environment, often in a state of decay and fragmentation, at its point of departure, the artist meddles with both, the abject and formless on the one hand, and related through accesses of representation, the reality of politics, race, and exclusion on the other. Archaeology of the present is as thought-provoking as it is thoughtful. My sincere congratulations to Kahlil. The exhibition was organized by, okay. The exhibition was organized by the Walker Art Center and curated by William Hernandez Lug, curatorial associate in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the San Francisco Museum of Art and formerly at the Walker Art Center. The presentation at the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum is curated by Meredith Malone, who collaborated with Kahlil to add several new works to the exhibition, including a just-finished complex ceramic piece. My warm congratulations to Meredith. This exhibition is made possible by the leadership support of the William T. Kemper Foundation. All exhibitions at the Kemper Art Museum are supported by members of the Director's Circle, with major annual support from Michael Foreman and Jennifer Rice, Julie Kemper-Fourier, Joanne Gold and Andrew Stern, David and Dorothy Kemper, Ron and Pamela Mass, and Kim and Bruce Olson. Further support is provided by the Hortense Lewin Art Fund, the Ken and Nancy Kranzberg Fund, and all the members of the Kemper Art Museum who are present tonight. And lastly, I would really like to thank Dean Carmen Colangelo for his very early support of this exhibition and this exhibition season. Thank you very much, and with that, I turn it over to Meredith Malone.
Thank you, Sabina. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers tonight, but before we do so, I really just want to reiterate congratulations to Kahlil on this really spectacular exhibition. It's been an honest pleasure to work with you again and to spend, the last so many months getting, to hang out with you, actually, to dive a lot deeper into your practice, which is just, as you can see when you all go to the exhibition, you can see how expansive Kahlil's practice is, the variety of different directions that he's taking, his really thought-provoking and compelling practice. So as Sabina mentioned, I had the honor to work with Kahlil on the St. Louis iteration of this exhibition, which came to us from the Walker. Kahlil Robert Irving is a St. Louis-based artist who received his BFA in art history and ceramics from the Kansas City Art Institute in 2015, and his MFA from the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in 2017. I was actually the curator of his graduating MFA exhibition that year, and so really it's wonderful to welcome you back to the Kemper for this major solo exhibition. Since graduating, Kahlil has gone on to a really incredible career Recent solo and group exhibitions include projects Kahlil Robert Irving at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2021, Soft Water, Hard Stone, the New Museum Triennial, also in 2021, the Great Rivers Biennial at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis in 2020, Making Knowing Craft and Art 1950 to 2019 at the Whitney Museum of American Art in 2019, and the Singapore Biennial also in 2019. Additional honors include a Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Biennial Award in 2019 and a Joan Mitchell Foundation grant in 2020. Last December, he won the inaugural Young Artist Prize from Cultured Magazine. In his exhibition at the Kemper Art Museum, actually coincides with another major exhibition at the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art in Overland Park in Kansas, near Kansas City, which provides, as we've been saying, Kahlil, this unique opportunity to really bookend both sides of the state of Missouri. So Kahlil is joined this evening by Hamza Walker. Hamza is director of LAXART and nonprofit space in Los Angeles. Prior to joining LAXART in 2016, he was the director of education, the associate curator at the Renaissance Society at the University of Chicago, a non-collecting contemporary art museum from 1994 to 2016. His recent exhibitions at LAXART include Nikita Gale, Takers in 2020, Candace Williams, Cassandra Press, The Absolute Right to Exclude, Reflections on the Implications of Cheryl Harris's Whiteness as Property from 2021, and Post-Commodity, Some Reach While Others Clap from 2020. In 2019, he was a juror for the Venice Biennial's prestigious Golden Lion Award, and in 2016, he co-curated the Made in LA Biennial at the Hammer Museum. Hamza has contributed reviews and art criticism to Art Forum and Parquet, and his essays have appeared in numerous exhibition catalogs and artist monographs. He's a recipient of the 1999 Norton Curatorial Grant and the 2005 Walter Hopps Award for Curatorial Achievement. In 2010, he was awarded the Ordway Prize for contributions to the field in the form of writing and exhibitions. Hamza is currently working on an upcoming exhibition titled Monuments to open in 2025. It mixes decommissioned Confederate monuments displayed alongside existing and newly commissioned works of contemporary art. Co-organized by LAXART and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, Kahlil will participate in this exhibition with the new commission, and possibly we might hear some more about that tonight. In their conversation this evening, Kahlil and Hamza will address a range of topics present in the exhibition at the Kemper, from Black life to collective memory to urban landscapes, as well as how mining of the both past and present artifacts begins to tell a fragmented history, or specifically a fragmented story of American history. And before we get started, I just want to say a few thank yous myself to our staff at the Kemper Art Museum for their incredible work on this installation. It looks beautiful. And I want to also shout out for the thoughtful programming that is to come, that our education department has worked hard to put together that will complement the show during its months on view. I also want to draw attention to an exhibition in our video gallery in the lower level of the museum that Kahlil curated. It's titled Space Mapping Video Art Series, and it includes 7 videos by 8 artists. The selected works highlight intimate moments in time and space when Black people are present, emphasizing the fact that, as Kahlil states, no matter the setting, we are still here. Locations range from a person's home to family gatherings to horseback riding in Oakland. The selected videos are by Tiffany J. Sutton, Lyndon Barrois Jr., Adelaide Jegede, William N. Morris, Cameron Patricia Downey, Tony Coates, Charles Lee, and Jefferson Pinder. Lastly, I want to invite you all to come back to the Kemper tomorrow at 1:30 for a curatorial tour that my colleague Dana Ostrander will be giving. She curated the exhibition that is also on view titled The Body in Pieces, which is in our Guerin Gallery. This is an exhibition that draws on the Kemper's permanent collection of modern art that explores how the fragmented body acted as a metaphor for modernity in the early 20th century art. Following our conversation this evening, Kahlil and Hamza will take a few questions from the audience, and then I'd like to invite you all to come over and see the exhibition with me at the Kemper. And now I will stop talking, and I invite you all to join me in welcoming Kahlil and Hamza tonight.
It's working. Yeah. All right. So I wrote these down, Kahlil, so as to be more efficient.
Okay.
Okay. We'll see. see if I can stick to that.
This is also without seeing any of the slides.
So I want to zoom out a little bit from the exhibition, which we'll get to, and just begin by talking about your practice in broader brushstrokes, and to locate you, situate you, contextualize you, perhaps generationally, which I think is really quite important and telling in a way. And it has to do with place and place making. So, as you can see from the exhibition, and most people familiar with their work would know, you're hopelessly pluralist in your approach. You're a child of the post-medium condition. I know, it sounds terrible. There's no cure. Sorry. And we'll get to that. What ails you? But one of the salient aspects of your practice is a commitment to place. You are embedded in St. Louis. And it's your family's home. I mean, in terms of everybody who knows you, you've been talking about, there's the work, but I think there's something which doesn't go, your sense of being here is tacit, let's say, but I would still say it's important to how people perceive your work and your practice, right? So the first question is basically how, if at all, do you situate yourself in relationship to, say, the Astor Gates and his, ever expanding complex of cultural organizations, institutions, platforms on the south side of Chicago, or we could think about Mark Bradford and his engagement with LaMerritt Park, or we could also think about Lauren Halsey, right, and her activist activities and the Summer Everything, is it a foundation, community center that she organized during the pandemic. So, and this is a two-part question, but I'll just start with the first part there. So, to what extent, for example, were Theaster and or Mark, did they at all serve as an inspiration for you?
In 2000, I think it was 2009, 2010, someone took me to see Theaster when he was having his project at Bruno David Gallery. And he was working and had been invited to come to St. Louis by the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. So I've known about Theaster since I was 18. And that's been, I'm 30, I'm about to be 32, so that's almost 14 years. Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible not to think about those people as not only participants and leaders, but also just beings in space. Mm-hmm. Thinking about all three of them, they all three have a very different energy.
Right.
And they all three have a very different presence. The first time I met Lauren was in New York. I went to see Devin Troy Struthers' basketball Space Jam show. Mm-hmm. And Lauren walked in and I said, "Hey, how are you?" And I asked her about her time working with Martin Curcels, and she just turned around and walked away. And I think in an interview I said the other day that I don't know what it would be like to do certain things if I didn't have the distant relationships with the people, similar people to who you're listing. Mm-hmm. Growing up in Missouri, there's a distance for access and also example.
Yeah.
And I think after a while, it sometimes becomes it can become fantastical. Mm-hmm. Because the proximity is it's just out of arm's reach, just out of reach. Mm-hmm. But there's an affinity. Right. There's an emotional connection.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, having been in Chicago, in terms of professionally coming of age in the late 80s and in the early 90s, looking at New York and the heady discourse and discussions around race, representation, multiculturalism, diversity and stuff, and thinking, Thelma and Glenn and Lorna, and I never thought, it's like, did these people one day be your friends? It was like, no, It's like,
Right.
you know, just from afar. Like
Yep.
you're saying, it was kind of took on a fantastical kind of dimension. You
Yeah.
know? But lo and behold.
And that's
it
one
was-
thing that's been able to happen for me.
Yeah, right, right.
Glenn has become a friend of mine.
Yeah. There's a spot at the lunch table that you didn't know about waiting
Yeah.
for you, you know, in a certain
Yeah.
sense. So.
I mean, it doesn't always come with arms open.
Oh, yeah. Okay, no problem. No.
It does not always come with arms open, though. Not from everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's a complicated reality to kind of navigate.
So,
Like even just emotionally.
Sure. I mean, but it's the kind of emotions that come with the terrain of making one's way in the world.
Exactly.
Right, as an artist.
Exactly.
So these are the slings and arrows of your fate. Yeah. But I bring them up as you know, like you were saying, they all have different energies in terms of what they're doing, but there's still a dimension of location and place for them that to me is very, very telling, right? So, you know, when I think about Theastra's development and reception, the effort, the attempt to link him to social practices, which is totally understandable at that time, but that has actually since been shed. And I would say the shedding is in part due to an ability to connect him to Mark and actually to you and to Lauren, right? Which to me then...
And to Rick.
And to Rick, right, exactly.
Or
Yeah,
and Jamal
right.
Cyrus.
Yeah, and Jamal Cyrus, right. So together, that to me, it's forming that concern with place. Despite the differences in energies and approaches, to me, it's you know, on the one hand, the question of art, like what you do. There is what you do. There is the work. But then I would say an adjacent question. There's what you do, but then there's the question of for whom you do it.
Right.
Right?
I
And
mean,
so-
that's part where the pluralism that you were mentioning comes into play.
Yeah.
Because there's a complication in the work
Right.
that does and does not allow.
Right.
There are multiple roads
Exactly.
that only allow for some and not others.
Exactly. That question kind of haunts or exerts a certain kind of pressure on a practice.
Yeah.
Right. And notably for Black artists. Right. So it's very telling, and that you could talk about, you know, in a certain kind of lazy shorthand. These artists are concerned with, for want of a better word, community, one of the most abused words around. Right? But I would say that actually also doubles as a concern with audience, right? Which is always ever present for art in general, right? Art and its audience, whatever it may be.
Wait, what did you say at lunch day? You said the influencer and the influencee.
Oh yeah, good, right. People say, like, I ask my kids,
Who's
like,
been
what do you want to be
influenced?
when you grow up? They're like, oh, I want to be an influencer. And I'm like, oh, that's great, because I want to be an influencee. Like, we can't live without one another. I need you. So right, that's, you know, and it's like with Carrie James Marshall, right, as another
now
example.
That's a name that's a little
Right.
bit more close than the first three people you mentioned.
Oh, interesting. Because I think about Carrie's, you know, in a different way, not with the question of place,
Totally.
but
But when he gives the lecture and he mentions the Pan-African flag that's painted on the garage door,
that's a brilliant,
that's down the street from his studio. You know, it's
that
not that
collection of
he's,
photographs and stuff. Yeah,
but it's not that he's engaged in putting that necessarily directly in the work, but that structure is that's a part of the structure of the work.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's part of when you talk
And
about
he
that Pan-African
acknowledges
flag.
it.
Oh, completely. And I would say his nod to the Pan-African flag doubles as the degree to which his work is totally ideologically driven, right? So to talk about Carey, when he says, "I want to be," you know, the generation before him saying, "I don't want to be a Black artist. I just want to be an artist."
Right.
Right. You're like somehow you want to transcend a certain kind of, you know, not be prescribed by, you know, cultural specificity, right, in a way, right? And with Carrie, I like the idea of going in the opposite direction. It's like, no, I want to be a black artist. What's wrong with that? Right? But to also, what that means is to say, why would you want to forsake the bond between artist and audience, right? Which is one, you could narrate the history of 20th century art as a breaking of that bond. It's like, as an artist, you can do whatever you want. You want to put a yam up your ass and chew on some aluminum foil, go knock yourself out. You can do free to be you and me, but you won't have an audience.
But you've worked with a specific group of persons to manufacture a kind of material that allows your body to digest the aluminum foil, despite, you know, like thinking about Popel with the newspaper and the milk.
Popel. That's a good one, right?
You know, thinking about Popel sitting up on that structure, eating the New York Times, but it wasn't the New York Times. It was a print on something that resembled it.
The New York Times, right, that he could digest.
That he could digest.
Yeah.
And he could eat the whole thing.
Yeah. So, right. And again, so even if it was a black artist, there's one. And I love the fact that Popel and Kerry James Marshall were both born the same year.
Wow.
I know. Doesn't that blow? It's like, wow, you don't think of them as being born in the same year, right? And they're two totally different paradigms.
Right.
And to me, it's like, damn. It's like matter and antimatter or some shit. You know, it's just like cancels each other out. And so it's like you just want to say, like, you know, young black artists, it's like, shit, you can do whatever you want now. It's like, that doesn't mean anything, right? It's like with these two ends of a spectrum, it's like, choice is yours. Both valid and legitimate paths to pursue. You know, but with Carrie saying, you know, to want to represent, right? To want to have the bond with the audience, right? Flying in the face of autonomy, right? In that notion of freedom to say, no, I want to serve, to represent, to forge that bond. So I think about, you know, in thinking about Rick and Astor, you know, Lauren, about that question about audience, but it takes the form of place-based, right? And a concern. So do you, you know, how do you think, do you think consciously about that question for whom you do the work? You know, and in what ways and in what degree, perhaps? Is it, you know?
I think it varies quite a bit because the scale of how something may be accessed in the work, like the scale of an image on the sculpture in the gallery, it's so small that it's almost illegible. Mm-hmm. But then it's stratified or sitting next to something else that may be a tangential understanding to get you to understand what the thing next to it is, or may not. Mm-hmm. And Meredith and I talked about one picture is like a photo. It's a split screen, and one photograph is Lionel Richie, and the next person next to him is dressed up as him for Halloween. Mm-hmm. But thinking about why somebody would do that is one thing. Then to capture that and to share that with others is another thing. And the people, who are the people that person's sharing that with, they're probably in a position to understand why that person would want to do that in the first place and the importance of Lionel Richie in culture. And is that dressing up as is that an aspiration? Or is that like a dream? Is it a possibility of something? Not just embodying as dressing up or as a kind of Halloween costume, but it's like almost also a yearning. It could be a reference to a yearning of freedom. That's not necessarily explicitly understood in the work for me. Like, I'm not working necessarily to share that part. But presenting some of that information in the work allows for other people to see that there are other people also interested in that.
So yeah, but that's, you know, when I was thinking about, it's interesting to think about the ways in which, you know, the degree to which you're I use the word embedded here in St. Louis, and your fixation, let's say, with real estate.
The only reason why I'm fixated with real estate is because I needed a place. Like, my mentor in New York told me, she said, you have to buy your place in St. Louis so you always have a place to go. And then in 2020, and my grandmother got sick, I had to come home and take care of her. And 2 years prior, having bought that building, I had a place to go.
Right. So
You
I
know,
like
and then
this.
I had a place for a family to also be.
Right.
And now, with the pandemic still ensuing, my grandmother may not be here, but I still got to work. I still have to live. I want to also build, like I told a friend, like, we got to build the world we want to live in. We're now 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. Like, we have to start making some decisions on what needs to be done. And it needs, if we don't like the way that it looks, we need to do something to make it look closer to the place we want it to look like. Well, I live in a neighborhood where things aren't necessarily all the way it may look in the Central West End or whatever. So if I could renovate a storefront and put a small restaurant in it, or a coffee shop, or a speakeasy, or a place to see art, or, you know, support somebody else doing something, I would rather that than the place sit vacant or fall apart or the roof cave in.
I like.
And I can do that because maybe I sell a sculpture and the sculpture costs X amount of money. I can take a portion of X amount of money and put it on and make the roof. You know?
So
And I have to, you know, and I also don't want to pay all my money to Uncle Sam. So if I don't want to pay all my money to Uncle Sam and I buy a roof, if I pay for a roof, that tells I can put that off on my taxes. I put a roof on.
I love this. Because when people think about your work, they think about you as a resolute materialist, right? I mean, there's the craft dimension in doing ceramics, but you as a sculptor, very much apparent in the show. But I like how that same spirit of resolute materialist thinking is like, oh, you're answering the questions in utterly pragmatic fashion, right? So I'm going on one tangent, you're like, nah, my grandmother was ill. And like buying the building here it's like, nah, these are just straight ahead life choices.
Yeah.
In a way, rather than being driven by questions of audience per se, right? This is this is what you know, and this is where family is.
Yeah.
You know, as a way. So I'm going to shift gears and actually repose the exact same question, which I've never done before. I just kind of like this idea, but about this show, right? So, asking the question about audience again, and I was asking it in relationship to placemaking and being embedded in a place, comparing you to other artists, but I'm going to ask the question, can you imagine art without its audience? Right? So that question, in some sense, is a different shade of like, well, for whom are you doing this? Right? In which case, that implies you're imagining an audience. But with this show, that question, can you imagine art without its audience, is quite literal because of the issue of staging. Right? It's a stage in the exhibition, and it's a staging of viewership. I would say.
On one hand, it could be.
Right. And on one, right. I see. It's like it's much more than simply a binding agent for what could otherwise be read as disparate works. I'd say no. It fills a much more. What it does to a consciousness of being a viewer and an audience is, I would say, a whole, that's where its conceptual weight is, I would say. But could you talk a little bit about the stage and staging?
This is the model that we made in the studio to scale in the gallery model of the Walker Art Center. I made it so in some ways that my grandmother could access it in a way, but other people who use mobility devices could engage the platform and see the sculptures. Some of the photographs that you've seen on the slides that I've been passing through range from the Church of the Nativity, a building falling down, this cone that's down in the street somewhere, and these moments kind of either tangentially relate to something that I've seen or things that I've done or things that I've worked on with other people, Or there are places that I've been, like I was in the Church of Nativity in 2014, and it was the interior of it was filled with scaffolding, and that's truly the impetus of this installation. Being able to walk through the church, and then at the rear of the church, you walk down a hallway, and then you can process in a line to where Jesus was known to be born, and then you walk out the other side and go back into the scaffolding. I bring that up because it was I don't believe myself to be Christian. I really see myself as agnostic. I have spiritual tendencies, and I think this installation it does not need to have anybody in it. In a lot of ways, it is faceted. It's made for people to access,
Right.
but it's really, like I told someone, it's a pavilion of metaphors.
Wow. Okay, but I love the idea of you're saying it doesn't need, whereas I very much see it, as responding and being oriented towards. And you're like, no, that, again.
And it can be both. It's a coin.
Okay.
Ever since I was in college, Janus is something that's been important. The god Janus can see to the past and the future at the same time. And there are very great examples of a silver coin of Janus's head as a small bas-relief on both sides. And when you see old ancient coins, someone's taking a huge hammer and taking a little piece of metal, and they're beating the metal to get the small impression on the coin. So almost all early coins that were made are forged by hand. Mm-hmm. And that pressure.
Do they use that Janus? Is that the symbol? Does Criterion use that?
I think so.
Criterion uses that as a and I've always loved that as their logo, in fact. But that's really beautiful that you see it as a collection or staging of metaphors, right? Which brings it closer to, I would say, one of the things I was struck by, funny enough, it was like Robert Gober, right, in terms of stagecraft, right, and that they're very overtly theatrical, right, but no less poetic, right, in terms of
constantly running water.
Yeah, right,
in the
exactly,
summer show
right,
with
yeah. You feel like you're in a theater. At the same time, you feel like you're in a theater set. You're still the way that your mind is. Still something else at work. Right.
And there are things still at work.
Yeah.
Like when you see Prison Cell from 1992 that was made for the Dia installation, there's a faux wall that was built that has lights in it, and then you see the prison bars, and then you see a blue sky, and it looks like a window, but it's really not a window. And it's too high, you can't access it, you can't climb out of it.
Yeah. Did you see, I just revisited it at the Glenstone.
Okay.
Yeah, it has it. And it's just, it was so, I've seen it.
Well, I saw it at the survey exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in 2015.
Right. Yeah, but it's just
and at the same time seeing the Chris O'Feely exhibition at the New Museum. And then at the Brooklyn Museum was the Judith Scott exhibition.
That's a good New York
So
trip.
those are three touch-tone exhibitions for me.
Oh, really? In one trip?
In one trip.
Oh, wow.
It was my last semester of college.
Wow. That's definitely a trifecta. Yeah. So the title of the show, Archaeology of the Present, tantalizing title, right? So archaeology implies the past. So, it stands in stark contrast to the word present, right? But so it plays more on the temporal aspect implied by archaeology as a title. And I actually want to follow a different thread, which is geographic. So, where is the excavation being conducted, right? So if you were to say an archaeology of the present in Los Angeles, it's like, dude, you don't have to dig for shit here. It's all, there's nothing underground. It's all the sprawl.
It's all above the ground.
Exactly. It's like, St. Louis, that strata,
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what is being excavated in the show for you, and especially you mentioned earlier the ceramic piece, right, with all the kind of like information on it.
I like gathered all these pictures and put them in a specific order, but it
I
don't
just
really
like to
matter.
see. Yeah,
We
exactly.
can skip to the end.
Oh,
This amassment sculpture was made upon an invitation to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville last fall to just work as a visiting artist. That I was just able to be present, and I didn't have any teaching obligations or any specific work that needed to be done. And the title is Caution Mass, in parentheses, in the bank. Media flow plus ground swell / pipes, tubes, chimney. And the images that cover it, for the most part, are from a collection of photographs and screenshots that I've been using for the last several years. Some of the images are inverted, or they're like presented upside down, or I twisted them 180 degrees. Some of this is like excavation from my studio, like some things that I've been working on find themselves into sculptures, but this is all made wet in the studio, then it dries. So like kind of everything is put together in one moment, like in a series of moments.
So, I mean, I like the fact that this is, to find, first and foremost, you're the subject of the excavation.
Yeah, a good friend of mine said that my work is engaging a lot of things. And one point of departure you could see or say that it's diaristic. But then there's a certain desire about the work that relates and connects to multiple experiences, despite it being diaristic.
Yeah, it's
I guess in that difference is that it's diaristic and it's not autobiographical.
Right.
That I'm not solely telling my story, but stories that spawn in connection to my own.
exactly. Yeah, I was going to say the touchstones. To call it diaristic and to say these are concerns, topics that have been, the strata over time at different times front of mind that are just collected. Well, there's that, but then the question is, wait, what are the concerns and topics themselves?
Right.
Right. So that yes, they are front of mind, but then they point. What do they then point to? Right. And I would definitely say it isn't just the nature of urban decay and that kind of thing that's worn on its sleeve as a work, but that it does point to a forces and feelings, mood, time. Well, decay. I mean, cities,
Sometimes
urban
like decay
fabric.
doesn't also necessarily, maybe not also decay, but just loss.
Loss, right?
Because loss transitions, decay just transitions to in a different way. Right. I think there's a certain kind of violence that can come with decay that doesn't necessarily, it is not necessarily also constituted in loss.
Right.
And I think like when we think about the buildings that are falling apart because of divestment or inaccessibility to certain things, like we can say decay, but I think if we say in some ways in loss, there's a certain place for accountability that can also be placed as well.
Right, but in the piece too, I want to locate, like in terms of period, a time period where and to me the piece is a particular sorrow, right? And so I can't altogether call it nostalgia, even though I do associate it with a really particular window, like 60s, 70s, right? A transition. And it's funny, talking with AJ about
For everybody that's or
the J for Gil Scott, it's a tune, I can't remember the tune, by Gil Scott Heron. Beautiful tune, and it's from 74, I think, 74, 75, and it's not from Bridges, Brian Jackson. But in the song, and AJ locates in the song, he says, this tune feels as though it's a conscious acknowledgement of realizing, the revolution that was supposed to be televised, it's like there will be no revolution, right? That this is, post, the civil rights, then this black nationalism, and this is post-black nationalism.
And then to add to that, there's a moment in Song Cry that's a song that's made from a sample by Jay-Z, where it seems like it's really, really, really not going back.
No, not at all. By the time we get to Jay-Z, we are well in the waters of neoliberalism. And that's a different,
But
whole
there's
different trajectory.
but when you think about the nostalgia, I think that situates in relationship to the samples at that time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. In terms of a reference or a touchstone, that's unavoidable.
Like the dream.
Right. A dream that wasn't fulfilled then, right? So it's going to keep.
It's going to keep dreaming.
Right. It's going to come back.
You
Right.
just keep dreaming.
Right. But but that period and moment can't be dissociated from what was happening within the political economy and its effects on cities, and especially St. Louis.
Right.
And so that's what that piece in terms of archaeology holds, while at the same time being diaristic.
Yes.
Right. So those were the thoughts that were in part front of mind or recurring.
I don't know if I can tell you that, to be honest. It's hard to tell it. It's hard to break it down, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well,
because sometimes I don't. I like there are boundaries, and sometimes I feel like some parts, in terms of like explaining exactly what's being excavated, or the parts or facets of the work that might kind of be able to be located. It's like it's like to a certain point of vulnerability that sometimes I feel like that's why the work exists or participates in this pluralist language, because it allows for a certain kind of anonymity, like living and presenting in that I can have anonymity, like what Nemo's father describes to him of being in the coral.
love it when Finding Nemo is.
I mean, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, but I didn't want to go to the, not necessarily when not the issue of diaristic versus, but being autobiographical, as much as I guess you mentioned the recurrence of the dream. When I look at the piece and I think about it references or it goes to a real specific time and place, that's a generation before you, I feel like, right? But at the same time, narrative of decay and loss is still in effect.
Yeah.
Right? So you inherit, it's still here.
Well, my name's Kahlil. My dad's name is Gibran. But we're named after a poet named
Kahlil Gibran. Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of like I feel like in time, it's like flopped.
Bookend?
Like it's flopped. Like I should have been born first, and my dad should have been born second.
Wow.
If his name is Gibran, I should come first because my name's Kahlil. Because there's a logic to it, but I think there's also that logic can be applied to the work. Like you just said, it's like I'm from the generation before.
Right, exactly.
I'm dealing with the ailments of before, so when I think about my lifetime.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, I've never applied that connection to my work. This is the first time. You're hearing it first here at the Sam Fox School.
No, but like I said, it's like you're answering, talking in such beautifully pragmatic terms. Like it's like, no, let me go to my dad's name and my name. Let's move those pieces around.
I am pretty pragmatic, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. It's really refreshing, actually. Yeah.
I have to say a few things, though. I have to say thank you to Building Clay Products. They donated the 2 large pipes to both my exhibitions. this is one of the factory workers here standing next to the 6 foot some pipe at the factory in Phoenix. And then this is them in their crates being moved to my studio. One to my studio, one to Minneapolis. I also have to say thank you to the people I work with in my studio, because a lot of these things wouldn't, like, it gestates with them in proximity to me. Some of the choices that I make, there are people who I can, like, I ask and reflect on things with, or joke with, or I'm very serious with, or we have space and we're quiet and we're diligently doing something, and it provides the space to kind of wrestle with some of these things that you're asking. And sometimes I do, and a lot of times I don't say any of I don't pose these questions or think about these questions out loud with them. But the space with them allows me to be able to engage it even on my own, because they learned that it also too is a vulnerable space that, we're kind of all moving through together.
Right, and I asked you to include these kinds of slides, especially with Tube, just to say, in talking about you as a resolute materialist in some sense, but the nature of the exhibition, it's like, oh, wow, these are very discrete works.
Right.
So that they come, they're relatively hermetic in a certain sense. They don't divulge process. And by process meaning, the fact that, as a ceramicist, these things are ceramic, that in terms of the factory, what these pipes are for, that you engage with all those questions, right, as part of the gestation. That's not present when you just simply encounter the work unto itself, but it's very much a part of the making of the work, the gestation of the work, but investing it with meaning.
Yeah. This is the image translation of a digital collage that's been warped into the computer, and then this image was used by a CNC machine to route the granite that's in the exhibition. Mm-hmm. And then that's the image from above, and that's a detail in the corner. I was really interested in trying to figure out how to make these digital collages from like exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art or the Contemporary Art Museum, St. Louis, into a kind of bas-relief. It's resolved in the exhibition here in a kind of topographical or landscape construction because of my limited understanding of how to volumize or sculpt things in 3 dimensions. And so that was part of what I worked on at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville with another artist named Riley Dickens Hoffman, and he assisted in trying to figure out how to make volumes or impressions from a flat picture. Mm-hmm. And so this is one of the pieces of stone in the Chinese factory that was cut open to create a slab of the work. And then this is an image of the work on a 4x4, 2 4x4s, and it's almost fresh from the machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this is the at the moment, the work that the black tube, right, ceramic piping, the way that you were discussing it, in terms of, I was thinking about the issue of it being a stage, which can't help but bring up the issue of theatricality, and Michael Fried, theatricality in minimalism. And so when I think about that tube and it being all black, and especially its height, Tony Smith, right, in Die, right, the one of the paradigmatic works of minimalism and and the criticism from art and objecthood. But I was wondering if that, for example, was a reference for you in the tube and in painting it black.
Well, the tube, the scale is based on how high and how wide it is, determines the weight and how that is dispersed into the ground. So it could only be so tall and so wide for it not to displace the terrazzo floors at the Walker Art Center.
Again,
I wanted it to
pragmatic.
be as big as I could make it. I wanted as big a pipe as I could get. It was hard to get a big pipe, you know, but I got that one. The reference to painting it black, I'll be a little bit more vulnerable and maybe tell you a little bit more. When I was a student, my college professor told me that I didn't know what a void was after doing a 2-month project, a month and a half long project on dealing with voids. And when I said that, behind me on the projector was an image of Richard Serra's piece of steel coming out of the corner of the room. Mm-hmm. But when the work's photographed, the steel is so black that it kind of decimates that room and creates an alternative geometry.
A void.
Well, she told me I should go back and relearn what a void is. But I just think she just didn't know who Richard Serra was. And so the work is called Monument, from an act to a void. So something born that thing into space. And the void is either the shape that's kind of dismembering the architecture around your point of view and where you're looking. And it's also holding space in the middle of it that possibly something can be there that is not accessible, not viewable. Mm-hmm. Like if it were to be lifted, would something still be there? Mm-hmm. But it's not. The object in and itself is the thing.
You mean
we know it has a hole in it,
right?
But we don't know what's
inside the hole, right?
But that's a quandary that one may engage when touching it and engaging it, but
right.
Not realizing that the thing that they're touching,
right,
is it.
In terms of creating that void,
or just being the monument or the work into itself.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think of that void. Like, does it have an inner life, right? Which is to, in some sense, project onto it some kind of perhaps psychoanalytic function or something.
Right.
Right? Like what an interior, an unconscious perhaps, you know, with that piece. I love the fact that you included the Dave.
Oh yeah, that's my David Drake pot.
Yeah.
It's dated March 12th, 1857.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I signed the mortgage papers March 12th, 2021. 164 years later.
To the day.
Well, the pot was still wet when he scribed that in. So it didn't get fired and it's not dated. Like its finishedness isn't March 12th.
Right.
It could be April 25th. It could be my birthday. It could be April 25th when he took this out the kiln or when this object was taken from the kiln. I think some parts of the exhibition is like, when does something become an artwork?
Well, it was really interesting to me that you were talking about what is and isn't signed in terms of going through the work.
Right.
And you were saying
there are a few works that are unsigned.
Right. And and I was just like, wow.
Because when I'm working, I'm not like pressing tiles and I'm like, oh shoot, I should scribe my name on the back of this real quick.
Right.
I'm like, oh no, get this thing in there, get it dry, let's get it fired and then get it glazed and let's move on.
Right, but the question of it not being signed in terms of authorship, like, is that, what I love about this too, is like, you know, I'm assuming this is going to come down on more the pragmatic side, rather than like questions of authorship, you know, like and everything. Instead, it's like, no, I didn't get around to it, or I just needed to move on to something else. But you seem kind of fixated with like what was and wasn't, you know, and I was like, wow, are they individual pieces? Or is the whole, you know, the parts in their relationship to the whole is what it kind of called into question.
Well, I didn't know how I signed the piece, the Steely piece. Like I don't know how, I've never made a work like that before, so I don't know how I would sign a work like that. Like that work could be destroyed, and it could be remade. So I could lose the signature on that work. The piece with the fake
certificates for that.
Right. And so I allow myself the flexibility to relinquish the having to also sign everything because things can be presented with a certificate of authenticity.
Which is convenient, you know.
It sure is.
So, There's more? Yeah. So, and just one more question before we open it up,
Okay.
audience-wise, which has to do with the painting, especially on the topic of authorship and signature. And it's, yeah, and it's you know, again, to think of you perhaps as like, it reminded me very much of like the pictures generation in some sense, and it's very cinematic, right, in terms of like, it's like a storyboard of sorts. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about it, perhaps along those lines. It's like, what's the narrative that's going on here, and then why painting?
Two of the images are photographs that I took, and two of the photographs are from a movie. The collages, like at the Contemporary Art Museum St. Louis, the Contemporary Art Center Cincinnati, the Museum of Modern Art, those installations are made up of, or even this work here, this light box was made as a precursor to making something that could be interactive, like a screen that all these different boxes could be moved around and something else is behind it, and then you could click on something and something else would populate, or you click on this thing and then the article would open up. And like that was like the true desire of why I made the light box. It was like, I want to get to that place. But this is a discrete object. But it's still, the implication of the architecture of the internet is still very present.
Oh, okay, right. So in some sense, it's a stand-in.
Exactly. And so if the architecture of the internet is present in terms of how you deal with the orientation of some of like the prescribed edges and lines or the text, the painting is like an evolution of that, dissolving away the edges that are defined by the screen. It's isolating certain information to kind of exist in the same plane. I don't know if this work is necessarily the most like successful of what I wanted, or was like getting across what I was desiring. So the wallpaper that's on the wall behind the light box, you see this you brought up Arthur Jaffa, this cross section of asphalt at the bottom of the collage. Here, I'll use the pointer. It is here. This like 4 to 6 inches of this collage is asphalt. But I was thinking about, when I was asked to edit this collage, I put the sky image in, but I was thinking about Arthur Jaffa's Ghidorah video, the animation, where it's a video of a rolling form that's breathing. Yeah. But this is it still. You don't see, like, you still see the texture, you still see what was possibly water or energy moving through
before
something.
it was broken up.
Yes. And now it's like less engaged. It's present. It's like the storm had passed. So from there, arriving at the paintings is like also because I work with someone who, her name's Sam. She has these like really great skill and is great to talk to and spend time with. And I think that between both of us, we kind of look at what I'm thinking about and we kind of pull some of those things out, and then there gets decided what is. Just these works are dreaming of movement. They are living or in motion at one time. Living in the internet, you can click something, populate something, move them, change the browser that you're on, or turn off the movie, or you could watch a movie and be on the internet at the same time, or your movie could be coming from the internet. This work is like slowing all that down. There are other large paintings in progress at the studio.
Yeah. Very interesting. So at this point we can open it up. Questions from the floor.
We have time for a few questions.
So we've got one.
kind of like moss. It's like a reference to grass without having to actually paint grass.
AstroTurf.
Yeah, it's like a reference to that kind of thingness.
But it's not green screen.
No, but it's
Okay.
a similar color. Yeah, Charles.
I noticed you use asphalt and clouds in a lot of your work. And in previous works, as opposed to this exhibition, the orientation of them is like the asphalt is on the ground and the clouds are usually above. Or in one of your exhibitions, I saw it was like really high up on the wall. But here, they're both the same orientation. And for me, it's like, that space is kind of like a dream world, and it's like this folding of time. Can you kind of talk about why those two, like the screens that are on the ground, why those two are on the same plane? Or if there was thought in that.
Yeah, the screens are faced up because I guess I'd be a little vulnerable again. I just like trying new things. I never made a movie before, never made a video before, so, you know, I had opportunity, I wanted to take it. You can do two things with an opportunity. You can either do what you've done before and keep doing that, or you can give yourself the capacity or space to grow a little bit and do something different. The goal of the screen situating those things at the same time was to just like put them in concert. I had to stand above one to make one, and I had to lay on my back to make the other. But I presented in the opposite orientation. It's not necessarily just about like dislocating you or trying to like give you a challenge. It was just, I know. When I was in graduate school, I started putting these pots that I made on these jacquard weavings. And they were the jacquard weavings were an isolated ground that the object could exist on that we could not. And so putting the sky back in that was just a way to kind of reposition it in relationship to gestures that I had made before. Yeah. But also looking down at the sky at something next to you that's so tall. Thank you. Yes. Yep. Yeah, I know what work you're talking about. What about it?
I was just curious if you could elaborate more on it, because I personally thought about just like black ice and just all the objects adjacent, like the grill that was embedded into it. And I was just curious about the connection of those objects.
Okay, that work is titled Flat Smoke. In like special brackets, my heart is and ain't heavy. Close brackets. Can we remember Miss Green? These square tile sculptures that sit close to the floor are kind of an evolved moment of those jacquard weavings sitting on the floor, making an isolated space. That sculpture is the first sculpture that I've made that has a glazed surface. The glazed surface, in reference to the beginning of the title, Flat Smoke, if we compress smoke in space to be 1/8 of an inch thick, is that what that looks like? But the glazed surface also allows for people or the viewer to be mirrored or reflected in the work. Ms. Green was a woman who owned a donut shop on South Jefferson. The donut shop is, the building is there, but she is no longer making donuts, and there's a black donut shop. I love donuts. Best donuts in St. Louis are on South Broadway, a place called John's. John's is the best donut shop in town. People could say Farrell's is good, but John's is the best.
Will they get dedications?
What?
Will they receive dedications
John's?
eventually? Just thinking about Miss
Yeah.
Green and what gets memorialized.
Right. I mean, when I think about black ice, you know, the sculpture is glazed. But black ice is not only a reference to the air freshener, even though it's present the glazed surface of the tiles also can be in relationship to the street. But Black Ice is also a song from 1998, and it's a collaboration. It's a Goody Mob song featuring a very young Andre 3000 and Big Boy. And so that the sculpture exists in relating three things simultaneously. The Big Rock was a sculpture that was one of the first sculptures like it that I made in my studio here in St. Louis. It was supposed to be like the sculpture in the vitrine, but I didn't like it. I pushed it over and I like picked it up and broke it multiple times. And I fired it in the kiln very slowly. Then I fired it again in Arkansas. Then I brought it back and I still didn't like its surface, so I've glazed it with the black glaze. The kind of mass, like putting that mass on the street, you know, it's like if the tiles are glazed and that acts as a mirror, then could that mass also be a pothole, like an inverse of a pothole? You know, and I think about why I do what I do. I really like what I do. I really like making art.
And you know what?
What?
I like looking at it. So you're the influencer and I'm the influencee.
We have one more question. Glenisha.
Congratulations, Kahlil. Blessings to you on your past, present, future endeavors. Something I've been thinking about while listening to you speak is this kind of relationship between the past, rather the public versus the private, in relation to research, in relation to intention, and even in this like process of removing or adding to get or move between the public and private. I want to know and ask, is that something you think about in your work? Because knowing your work, I feel like that's something that I've thought about since in college. And if you could speak about that a bit.
I think that's partially why I invited other artists to exhibit with me at the same time here at the museum. Because I think some of the works that they deal with some of those like specific, maybe more public things that I'm not necessarily actually speaking to directly. Like we see here is like a photograph of dealing with the installation with the team here who are wonderful to work with. And there's like this board fragmenting Tony Coates' video in half, but like I think like see that as a form, but then when you watch that video, that's not present. But when you hear what she's talking about, it's like something I wish I had talked about in the show, but I don't want to, because I know there's somebody else who also does it or does it better than I think I could, or that I've tried to work out in my studio. I think public and private exist in a way that, well, I guess when you bring up like an artist like Tony Smith and what was the preoccupation of a minimalist agenda as an artist, there was like a removal of so many things. And even in the previous exhibition, Adam Pendleton, the gallery that has the collection exhibition in it, there's this large sculpture in the room. I saw it as a sculpture. It was addressed as a sculpture, but it was a black box. And on the inside, he made a video with a dancer named Kyle Abraham. Mm-hmm. And it was this very vulnerable and beautifully engaging dialogue between them. But then it's this video that's segmenting the information that Adam had gathered from meeting with Kyle. That was great, but I was captivated by that box. To see such a sculpture in that room really took me. And I think there's place for both. And I don't know if I just give myself space to kind of deal with them, I think, in different ways at different times. And being afforded opportunities, being invited opportunities, some ways I want to say earning them, but it's hard to say that. But I say being in conversation with different things makes that a lot more, it makes it easier. I feel like, because we've had a conversation about private, like what is private information before. And I think about that all the time. And I actually have the next step to that question you asked me almost 10 years ago. And I think it's like also being okay with not giving it all. Thank you all.
Thank you.